All right, we've got a Morgan PR36 in. The owner says that it hums. This is a little bit complicated. I'll tell you more about that after I open it up. Let me get it out of the cab and we'll talk some more. All right, here's where it gets complicated. The owner called me about this amp about a week ago. I'd done some work for him in the past, nice guy. And he said that the amp had a hum that made it difficult to record with, and the hum was there even with the amp in standby. And I said, well, send it in, let me take a look. It's possible that there's a transformer orientation issue that can give you hum when the amp's in standby. You can get noise injected from the power transformer into the output transformer. And that, worst comes to worst, I could try rotating it. And he said after that conversation that he rotated it and the standby hum went away, but there's still a background hum. And it didn't strike me as highly plausible that he rotated this, because it's not a simple thing to do. You've got to do some planning. And you can see that they've used the same chassis for some other output transformer on different models. Different output transformers have different hole patterns. But this one was right here, and when I took the amp out of the box, I noticed a rattling. And this screw has snapped off, and much to my consternation, that screw is going into a threaded receiver in the chassis, and I can look down in that. You can't see it very easily here, but I can see the broken metal in there. So I'm going to have to see how I can get that out. Maybe there's something sticking out from the other side. I can Dremel a little crosshatch in and get it out. So that'll be an added complication that should not have happened. I'm not blaming the owner. It's not the highest quality screw in there, but it might just be shipping issues. But it strikes me as odd. So the output transformer frame is only attached to the chassis at one side, but that should not be causing hum. It's still connected to chassis. And this will let me play around with orientation a little bit, though the wires going through the grommets will limit that a bit. And I'll make sure all the other hardware is tight. Let's flip this over, take a look inside, and see if I see any things that are worrisome before I power it on and plug it in. I'm going to turn the volume up to about 10 o'clock and treble and bass at noon. Reverb and dwell controls off. And we'll see what we see before we power it on. This is practically a brand new amp. I believe it is literally just a couple weeks worth of use. Well, this particular Morgan is better built than many I've had on my bench in the past. In the past, I've had issues with caps not rated for the voltage present, and I will triple check that. We got some 450 volt caps and some 400 volt caps, and I've had issues with things not being tight on power switches. These seem okay. They're not using tooth washers for the output jacks, which is not a optimal thing. The only thing in here that I would instantly ding them for is that the AC safety ground, which is this black wire here, is going to this terminal strip to chassis, and it's secured by one of the screws holding this rectifier tube socket in place, and that ground is shared with other grounds in the amp. An electrical safety code, as in to make it legal to sell to you, as in this should not have been made like this. Did they buy the CE sticker off eBay? That kind of thing bothers me. This ground wire from the IEC connector should be short. It should be green or green with a yellow stripe, and it should go to its own dedicated chassis connection shared with nothing else. So this is not built legally, and I've run into that with a lot of small companies. And I don't know whether this actually has its CE certification or not, but that is a fail. That's one of the first things that they would look for. But in more pleasant news, I think I see the source of the hum that this amp has. There's a ground wire right here, and it is grounding out It is the ground for the phase inverter. And while it's not the prettiest thing, it should be absolutely fine. And it is going to this ground lug right here. And that ground lug is being held in place, or was being held in place, by the screw, which is securing that output transformer on the other side. So there's a connection here and a connection here they were using here. So one long screw going through the chassis, which held the output transformer on one place, and this ground for the output, the phase inverter ground, here. And that screw is broken, so this is not a tight connection. Let me see if I can back that nut out. Maybe the entire screw will come out at the same time, and everyone's life will be easier. Mine especially. Now, that does not mean that this will solve all the woes that this amp has. It's possible that this screw was broken before he even looked at the output transformer. Yay, it came out. Good. So this should be a simple thing to fix. So let me replace this screw with its caps nut. And what I think I'm going to do, though, since we have these lovely chassis connections that aren't being used for a different output transformer, is that looks like an 8x32. So if I can put an 8x32 in here for this ground, and then a separate one, 6 or 8x32, that holds the output transformer, and separate those functions so the chassis connection for this ground is not the same as the chassis connection that just secures that transformer, because there can be some stress on that, as you see. So let me see which screw size that is and try to put this all back together nicely. All right, instead of just using these really cheap Phillips head screws which have a built-in star washer, I'm using these stainless steel 8x32 machine screws with a compression washer, or a ring washer, and then a large washer to reinforce the flange on the output transformer mounting bracket, because it really does a much better job of getting everything tight and spreading that force out over a wider area, so the transformer itself is much less likely to deform or come loose. Tighten up both sides of that. And make sure that all the iron is tight while I'm at it. I don't expect to have much issue with the reverb and choke transformers, because they're very lightweight for their size. Just make sure this power transformer is tight. It's got the good flanges that Mercury uses on the power, so that's not going to go anywhere. Though if this were my build, I would still have used some washers and compression rings like that. Show you the inside now. All right, there is the screw that's holding that output transformer in place. Here's a new screw that has that ground, and that is very, very tight. So let's do a quick look and see. I'm not nuts about these resistors soldered across these caps, because they have it right there against the cap body, and that puts a lot of heat on these caps when it's being soldered. Very easy to do it that way, but not the best in terms of thermal management while doing the build. As far as I can tell, both from the name, which is PR36, and what I can see, this seems to be a Princeton, one-channel Princeton reverb with 6L6s and tremolo, but not reverb. So let me take a few measurements, and then we'll power it up, and we'll see what we see as far as hum, as far as sound, etc., etc. That main ground really does bother me. I get called an elitist because I think things that should be built really well, especially things that are for sale, should be built really, really well. Anyway, let's see what my elitist ass thinks of this. All right, I went through it real quick, and what it is a Princeton reverb without tremolo, and they're just using one tube to drive and do a recovery on the reverb. So the reverb is not going to be as deep as on a real Princeton. And they offset that a little bit with how it's mixed across this resistor here. 2 megs instead of 3 meg, and they don't have the cap across it, so it's not going to quite have the air that the Princeton has. They did use the normally unused node in the B plus supply to power the the phase inverter, which does give more headroom to the phase inverter, but they did not really take advantage of that because when you increase that voltage, you need to change the plate and cathode resistors because the load line changes, and they just have the stock 56K that Fender used. You know, this is copying rather than designing an amp. They also did not fix the inherent flaws of the cathodione phase inverter, which can give you take away some of the nasty behavior that lets you then take advantage of greater swing to the output tubes, which you get away with a little bit more with this amp with the 6L6s than with 6V6s. This amp does not have a big hum. However, the output tubes are both very microphonic. They're matched well, but they're very microphonic, and that's going to be just these are fairly cheap ARS Chinese tubes, so it needs some better 6L6s. The preamp tubes are also generics. It doesn't seem to be an issue there. The bias is at 40% idle right now with the wall voltage at 114. I think this amp needs some better output tubes, certainly non-microphonic output tubes. The standby switch is totally unnecessary in this amp. It's got a GZ34, and there's just no need to have a standby switch. These filter caps here are fairly cheap ones. They are, however, rated for 450 volts, which is greater than the unloaded B plus in the amp. So that's a down the road issue, not a kind of catch on fire at any moment issue like I've seen in some other Morgans. Don't be fooled by the Sozos. The Sozos are okay caps, nothing wrong with them, but nothing great. They do have the CDM micas, so they're not using the generics. These are 1 watt Zycon carbon films, about a penny each if you buy in bulk. You know, it's nothing wrong with them, but given the mystique some brands have, you know, this is not that fancy. None of the pots have any lock washers, which I think it should have. Part of that's because they're using the alpha pots and they're using a fairly thick plastic panel, which makes it difficult. I don't know whether these are the 3/8 or the metric pots. If I need to take any of them out, I'll find out. They are using switchcraft for the output jack, but they don't have lock washers. These really should have them. With this thicker rear panel, though, you have to use the long bushing output jacks to be able to use a tooth washer. So, you know, it's kind of what you see in some Dr. Z's, where a whole bunch of stuff is almost good, or almost good enough. You know, and it gets by, and people think it's great. I don't know why some brands get great reputations, others don't. I guess if you're coming to this from a Line 6 or a Crate or something, this is phenomenal in comparison. For those of us who do, you know, it's not about the amps I build, but in terms of people who've actually played a bunch of Fenders and Marshalls and Voxes and stuff from the 50s and 60s and early 70s, this is a whole lot of pretty good. Let's see what it sounds like. All right, I'm going to unplug the lav mic so we can have the phone mic, because it does do audio in the on the workbench better. Now, they're not using the correct taper pots for Princeton, so I expect the treble neutral position to be a little bit higher than on the old ones, and it's not going to have as much volume even for a Princeton at lower o'clock positions. But let's see if this is just a Telecaster because it was handy and I already had it plugged in. sure what they're implying by the PR36 name. When I put some new output tubes in this thing, because it really does need them, those, they shouldn't have microphonic output tubes. I'll measure what the actual clean wattage of this amp is, and I guess the next thing for me to do is put it back in the head cab and see if some of that hum is being induced by the reverb tank, because it's a very small head, and when you have a reverb tank in proximity to power transformers, you often have hum. So it's possible that the amp itself on the bench like this is just fine, and it's very quiet with the guitar off and the volume up. Good low noise floor. But once it's in the head cab with that tank fairly close to all the transformers, we may have some hum. So let's find out where we're at that point. And at that point, I need to talk to the owner. All right, I'm leaving the lav mic unplugged so you can hear the audio a little bit better coming from the speaker. With nothing plugged in, the amp is pretty quiet. However, I've got the dwell all the way up, which is kind of a misleading term. It's not going to give you a lot more decay time. It's, at its max, it's where Princeton is stock. It just goes down from there, so you think you're getting a big change. But as I turn the reverb level up, you're going to hear hum. And that is because of where the tank is physically. It's up here, and it's close to these transformers. There's a reason that most amps that have good sounding reverb are combos. Or if you have an amp where it has reverb and it's a head, they're typically very large heads. Think a Fender Twin, what is it called, the Showman reverb or the Bandmaster reverb. Those heads were very tall to get that tank physically away from the chassis, away from the transformers. Let me grab the telly and we'll see at what level compared to the guitar signal that reverb is audible, to see how big a problem that hum's going to be. And by the way, I was wrong about the output tubes being ARS. They are TADs, which are usually very good tubes, but this one here is just very microphonic. So here's how the guitar sounds. Those with the reverb all the way up. Let me turn it down to about 10 o'clock, see where we're at. Sounds like a short tank. All right, so they're doing a lot of makeup gain on that to offset the fact that there's not much drive to it. All right, so where most people would use that reverb right around here, the hum's not too bad there. So I think as long as the owner knows to expect a little bit of hum if he has the reverb on, that's just unavoidable with this style of construction, with the tank up there hovering right above the transformers. Probably could hook up a tank to that and move it 6 inches away and have that hum completely disappear. Or I could change the orientation / axis of the tank and have some changes happen, but there's just not physically the means to do that in there. So I think what's the likely cause of the hum that this owner reported was that screw was already broken that holds the output transformer in place. And as that screw was broken, and it was also making a ground for the output, it just wasn't a very good connection, so you got hum. So it really needs some different output tubes, because 6L6s should not be making any thumps like that. let you hear that dwell as I turn it down. See if I can reach over. And see, that was it full up. Let me turn it down to halfway. Turn it down to like 9 o'clock. And it's doing two things. It's not only just reducing the level of the signal being fed to the reverb, it's shaving off low end. As you turn it down, fewer and fewer low end frequencies are being fed to the reverb. So if you have the dwell down and you turn the recovery level up, so I can do this upside down, you can get more reverb with less low end in it. But you are going to introduce hum. The higher you have that reverb level, the more hum you'll have in there. Now where this dwell circuit, with not in terms of the level, but in terms of the low end response, can be nice, is a lot of modern tanks have too many lows and lower mids. And so by using it as a high pass filter, you can make the tank sound a little bit more like a Gibbs or old Accutronics. Especially with these little bitty tanks, they don't sound that great to begin with. So let's see, I'll put that about 10 o'clock, turn that back up to about 9:30. What it's doing is really offsetting the limitations of that small tank. And the issue, though, is that the low frequency hum that we're hearing, it's probably 120, 240 hertz, comes through the recovery side, and the dwell doesn't touch that. And that's just proximity to the transformers. So, but as far as a big noticeable hum goes, once that reverb's off, there almost isn't any. And what is left is largely because of the ground scheme of this amp. And I know the owner wants it to be really, really good, but I'm not sure how much he wants me to make changes versus how much he wants me to just troubleshoot and get the thing as good as it can be as it is. And part of me doesn't want to make this Morgan perfect, because I think at that point, a brand new amp from a company that people love to have in their videos because they have so much cachet right this week, I think if the amp is less than perfect, it should sound less than perfect. I think if Morgan wants their amps to sound better, Morgan should make their amps better. But you know, I'm jaundiced that way. I've got several Princetons here right now, every one of which sounds at least as good as this. This just has a bit more output because of the 6L6s and the bigger iron. I think in a lot of ways there's some missed opportunities in this little metal box.